Goddamn, Craig, it's great to have you back. So please help me welcome
Oh my gosh! Okay, let's see where to start. Okay, yeah, this is like the 21st book in the Walt Longmire series. Like, it still sounds strange coming out of my mouth like that because the first, when I wrote the first book, The Cold Dish, it was supposed to be a standalone book. It was just a standalone novel. And Viking Penguin picked it up, and I remember sitting there in New York with Catherine Court, who was a senior editor for Viking and the president of Penguin, and she said, we really, really like this book. And I said, well, I'm really glad to hear that, because if you guys are going to publish it, I just assume you like it, And she said, I don't think you understand what it is I'm saying. And I said, well, maybe not. And she goes, well, we just think this place and these characters, they've got more to say. There are more stories, and we just think you should, consider that. And that's when I said, well, you don't think we're going to run into a problem, killing people off in the least populated county in the least populated state. And she said, we trust that you'll find a way around that, Craig. And so, then the question became, okay, well, how do we go about doing that? And so I thought, well, all right, well, what do I need to do? Change the jurisdiction here a little bit. And so I did. I thought, okay, well, just because the books start at this one point doesn't necessarily mean they have to, stay in that chronology. And so I started going back and forth in time like that. I went back. I think the fourth book took place, in Vietnam in 1968. The one I just wrote last year, First Frost, took place in 1964. Tooth and Claw, 71. And so I had fun doing those, and then also changing the geographic area of Walt. Because one of the things I've noticed in crime fiction is, the characters always like that do these incredible things, where they save the world, in this one, book. And then in the next book, nobody remembers that they did that. It's like it never happened or something. And I thought to myself, boy, that's just not the way it is in law enforcement. It's not like it is in, in TV and movies, where it's like, hey, this is our jurisdiction, it's our turf, man, It's a foxhole mentality. If you've got somebody who can help you out, in a case or a cold case or a file, you're going to ask him to help. And Walt's kind of like a world-class detective. He's very good at what he does. He just happens to be the sheriff of the least populated, county in the least populated state. And so I thought, he would be in demand, in a lot of these situations. There are 23 other counties in Wyoming alone where these other sheriffs might ask him for some help. So I started bouncing him around a lot of these different places, and that's kind of what happened, with this particular book, in a different sense. And one of the other dirty little secrets about my books is they all come from newspaper articles, every single one of them. They're always like some newspaper article that I've read, and what's nice about that is it kind of like makes for like a grounded, aspect of the books, so that Walt is really dealing with the things that Wyoming sheriffs, Western sheriffs deal with. Because I read some books that take place in our part of the world, and I'm like, there's no way in a million years that would ever possibly happen. And so it keeps it kind of grounded in the reality. And so, whenever I was reading this article about this woman that had the longest postal route in the United States, in Wyoming, where she goes over 300 miles a day delivering the mail. She has 5 stops. That was a joke. You can laugh. I do that joke back east, and they're like, really? No. So anyway, she's got this, and the first thing I thought of course, with the nefarious mind of the crime fiction writer was like, well, if she went missing, where would you look for her? Because you're looking for her in a place the size of Maryland, for God's sake. Sweetwater County alone is the size of Maryland. And so I thought, well, that would be interesting. And so what I did was I decided I would have, the inspector, the postal inspector for the state of Wyoming, call Walt up and ask him to get involved with this investigation. And, the great thing about being in Wyoming, of course, is that you can call up the postal inspector for the state of Wyoming, and he will answer his phone. You can just talk to him. So I call him up, and I'm talking to him. We're having a really nice conversations going on for about 30, 40 minutes or so, and I'm peppering him with, because I hadn't started on the book at all, I'm peppering him with, hypotheticals. Well, what if this happened? What if this happened? What if this happened? And we get to one, and he goes, well, it's not a federal, case. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he goes, well, it's not a federal case. And he said, the abduction of this particular, postal worker. He said, because, a lot of these really long postal routes that we have, what we do is we, have contract, laborers that we come in like that, and they bid on these, long bids like that. So it would not be a federal employee like that, so it wouldn't be a federal crime. And then there was a pause, and he goes, but the mail would be. And I was like, what? Look at it. He goes, yeah, once it goes into that receptacle, it becomes the property of the federal government. And he says, at that point in time, it's mine. And I can get any inspector I want. I can bring in the FBI if I want to bring them in to investigate it. And he pauses for a second, and he goes, I'd bring Walt Longmire in. And I was like, well, we're going to get along. And so we talked for a little while longer. And so, of course, then when you've got this basic plot line, for a book, then the next thing you got to decide is where is it going to take place, And Wyoming, I'm lucky, like Montana, it's got a topography and a geography that varies, in so many different ways. And there was a little area, one of my favorite quotes about that is from Studs Terkel, the famous newspaper man from Chicago, where he said, nothing ever happened nowhere, And so wherever you pick, it's obviously going to have a very large scale effect, on the plot and the story. And I had this one spot that I hadn't been in all that much, the Red Desert down in the south central portion of Wyoming has the largest living sand dune in the United States. Now, I would have thought that would have been in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, some parts of California or whatever. Evidently, it's in Wyoming, and you can actually see it, with satellite imagery. It's that big of a dune field, for goodness sake. And I thought, well, that would be an interesting place to go, knock around in like that, because I'm a big believer that you got to go where the book takes place. You can't just use Google Maps, and watch, documentaries on YouTube and, read books and things like that. You need to go, because you're going to have an emotional response to a place that's going to inform the book to a great extent. And so the way you can do it is, of course, the best way that you get to see the lay of the land is by walking. That's number one. The second one's going to horseback. The third one's on a motorcycle. The fourth one's on a doored vehicle. So I know that my horses are old, and they did not want to go do that down the Red Desert. And so I thought, all right, well, I got this old dual sport motorcycle. It's an on-road, off-road motorcycle. It's about 50 years old, and if it has a straight piece of metal on it, I don't know where it would be. And so I decided, what, I'll just take the motorcycle and go down there and just ride around in the Red Desert and just get a feel for the whole place. And so I'm loading up the bike, I rolled up a tarp, getting everything all put together. And my wife Judy comes down, she's watching me load up the bike, and it dawns on me, I have not asked her if she would like to go on this trip. You'd think after 30 years of marriage I would be having it down a little bit, but I don't. And so I looked at her and I said, well, do you want to go? And she goes, where are you going to sleep? And I said, well, I'm going to zip tie a tarp to the motorcycle, and then just stretch it out and put some rocks out, to hold it, like a little slope there, and just put that sleeping bag and sleep under there. And she's, no, I do not want to go. And I was like, well, so much for your sense of adventure. And so anyway, I took off real early on a Saturday morning. And I get down there, and it was early when I got down there. Man, I'm crisscrossing all over the place. Interesting thing about the Red Desert is the BLM, the Forest Service, has a somewhat laissez-faire attitude about signs, and so you get lost a lot when you're driving around in there. I got lost about 3 or 4 times. But I was on that bike, for a good solid, 14 hours, for goodness sake. And I was getting a little worn out by the end of the day. And I thought, I better find a place. It's getting dark. I better find a place and, conk out. And I found a little rock ridge. And I pulled the bike over there. And lean it over, put it on the kickstand. And tie off the tarp, with zip ties. Get it connected, stretch it out, put the rocks on there. And, get the sleeping bag out and crawl up underneath there. And that's when the wind started blowing. And wind's blowing about 35, 40 miles an hour, and the tarp's coming loose and flapping, and then it started raining, and then it started sleeting, and then it started snowing, and then the motorcycle fell over on top of me. And I thought, this is going to be a long night, so finally I just said, I'm going to lay here covered up and just not pay any attention to it. So the next morning's real early, the sun's coming up, and I thought, I'm going into Farson and have breakfast. I think I've earned a treat. Now, everybody in central Wyoming knows Farson because it's Farson Mercantile, which has ice cream. And so anybody that's running through that part of Wyoming, the big trophy is to go to the Farson Mercantile and get ice cream. Well, right next to it is Mitch's Cafe, which has been there since, I think, the 30s or something. And it's a great little cafe with really good food. Look at it. So I pull the motorcycle in there, put the kickstand down, lean her over, crawl off, look at it, come in, and I'm like completely coated, in mud and sand and everything. And I look like something out of Mad Max is what I look like. And I come walking in there and I sit down, at the first booth, in case they kick me out. And I sit down like that, and the woman that owns the place comes over, and she walks over like that, and she looks at me, and she looks out the window, into the parking lot, and she looks at me and goes, "Your motorcycle fell over." I look back up at her, and I'm like, "Yeah, it does that." And so then she's looking, and on one of the panniers, like at one of the saddlebags, the hard case bags, I've got one of those bumper stickers that says, Walt Longmire for Sheriff, Absaroka County. And she looks at me and she goes, "Are you Craig Johnson?" Look at it, and I said, "Yes, ma'am, I am." It's not that big of a shock. There's only 500,000 of us in the whole state, so everybody knows everybody else. And I said, "Yes, ma'am, I am." Like that. And she goes, "Well, what are you doing down here?" And I said, "Well, I'm actually doing research, on a book I'm going to write." Like that. And she goes, "Well, where does it take place?" And I threw my thumb over my shoulder. Like that. And she goes, "Red Desert." Like that. And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she looks at me like that, and she goes, "Be careful out there. A lot of strange things happen out there in the Red Desert." And I was like, "Oh, here's my book. Here it is." Like even having the motorcycle fall on over on me was like even worth it. Like that. Would you guys like to hear a little bit of it?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Attach this. Get out my safety glasses here. Hold on. All right, here we go. I'll go from the beginning. Okay, that way I won't give anything away. Also, I'm not going to read the whole book because you can do that at home. Okay, so here we go. Nobody smiles anymore. Excuse me? Have you noticed? Nobody smiles anymore. Mike adjusted himself in the tiny postal Jeep, setting his back against the passenger side door as he sat on the floor beside a dog, so no one would see him in the September early morning light. Remember when you were growing up how you were taught that when you walked down the street and you met a stranger, that you smiled and you said hello? He sighed, staring at the plethora of mail and packages in the back as if it were a weight that he could no longer bear. People don't do that anymore. Mike Thurman, my late wife's cousin, was in a bad mood, but that didn't mean that he didn't have a point. Mike had been having a tough month, so I tried to distract him a bit, thinking of something to say while surveying the interior of the utility vehicle. "So, why do they call this model Jeep a DJ?" He grunted, swiping off his Seattle Mariners ball cap and rubbing his shaved head and then reaching over and scruffing the fur behind sleeping dog's ears. "Dispatch Jeep." Oh, also, they're all full-time two-wheel drive, smart for Wyoming in the winter, huh? Was she driving one of these? Oh, no. Now, there's no way you could fit all that mail in a 307-mile route in something like this. She had a hopped-up 68 International Travel all that she drove. He shook his head, putting his cap back on and folding his hands in his lap. She probably used up her entire paycheck putting gas in the thing. He nodded to the right. Turquoise and white with all those hippie stickers in the back window. I think it was an old ambulance. Or what? A hearse. Neither of us wanted to dwell on that. I think it's for sale at a used car lot about a quarter of a mile down the main drag on Foothill Boulevard. That piece of shit boyfriend of hers, Benny, sold all of her stuff about a month after she went missing. Don't you have to wait 60 days? His name was on the title. Sweetwater County processed the vehicle. He studied me with a raised eyebrow. I am a postal inspector, not a criminal investigator. I glanced down at the heavy file folder in my hands. Geez, Mike, haven't you seen those TV shows? Anybody can do this stuff. Yeah, right. I gave up on trying to distract him. So, what is it exactly that you want me to do? Find her. Well, I can tell you from experience that's not likely to happen because of the amount of time, that, and the size of the area that she was lost in. I shook my head. Is there any way to narrow the search area? I wish there was, but it's as if she disappeared off the face of the earth out there somewhere in the desert. Did you talk with the Sweetwater County Sheriff's Department? He nodded. The primary investigator, Jake Moline. Never heard of him. U-turd, I think. U-turd? From Utah. That's what they call him down here. Nice. Hey, I live in Colorado, and I shudder to think what you guys call us. I slid the map he printed for me from the file folder and looked at the gigantic loop surrounding the Red Desert, the south central area of my state. So, you want me to pretend that I'm a contract laborer and just follow her postal route? Yeah, see what pops up. Pops up? Yeah. He took a sip from his travel mug. You're the king of pop-ups. You see things other people don't. And you don't think that somebody will suspect that I'm law enforcement? Nah. We get all kinds of people as contract rural carriers, especially the long routes that nobody else wants. He chuckled. Besides, you got that fake ID and that nifty mountain man beard. I scratched the offending fur and then thumbed through the folder again, looking at the photo of the missing woman in her 50s. Why do you suppose she did? Did what? Take one of the especially long routes, especially one of the longest in the country. He sat up a bit, looking around at the empty post office parking lot. You know, she told me once that she liked to drive because it helped her to forget. I stared at the photo of the dark-haired woman with the silver streak down the middle, one eye slightly errant and half smiling with a note of wiseacre. Forget what? She never said, and I never asked. I closed the folder. You know, she could have just walked away. Not her. Why? Well, she was kooky, but she took things very seriously. At least some things. He shook his head. How's it go? And neither sleet nor snow, neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. I watched as the first vehicle swept into the postal lot. It's not official, you know. What? That motto. It's not official. He sipped his coffee some more. The hell you say? Stuffing the folder back in the satchel, I watched as a young woman got out of her vehicle in a Carhartt jacket and walked up the ramp to the back door of the facility, punching numbers into the keypad and yanking the door open and going inside. That's Tess Anderson. She's the morning super, and she'll be the one that shows you the ropes. She was pretty good friends with Blair. Was, huh? I pulled the door handle and stepped out onto the smooth surface of the concrete, buttoning my old canvas hunting jacket and adjusting my hat. When they built the James A. Farley Post Office in New York City, the architectural firm set the words in stone, and everybody assumed it was the creed of the Postal Service. Never adopted. It's from the Persian Wars by the Greek historian Herodotus. During the conflict between the Greeks and the Persians, 500 to 449 BCE, the Persians had a mounted messenger service, a really impressive one. So impressive, in fact, that Herodotus used those words. Well, I'll be damned. I gestured towards the beast next to Mike. You'll look after my dog while I'm gone? Sure. Greenies. He looked up in confusion. Excuse me? We Wyomingites would call Coloradans greenies. Why greenies? Your license plates are green. So, like, you know, in this situation, of course, like, I don't know if you guys remember Dark Horse, the fifth book in the series. That was Walt's first attempt, you know, at being undercover. And I think it's by about page 10, I think he actually says, I should have understood the inherent difficulties of going undercover in a town of 50. Because generally, if one person knows you, the next hour, everybody's going to know who you are. Again, so here's Walt, I get down there, you know, and he's undercover once again, like that, and you know, he really can't bring his usual backup with him, like that. He can't bring Henry, like that, because he's going to stand out so much. Like that, he can't bring Vic with him because somebody's got to stay back in Absaroka County and run the county, right? So he's left like it with the only person or the only individual that he's got left to be able to be his backup, which is Dog. And so what happens is, like, he brings Dog with him, like that, and you know, it's, you know, I get two kinds of emails after every book. They're the ones that say you need to take it easy on Walt. You beat him up too much in the last book, you know, so take it easy on him in the next book, like, and which is always fine. I think it's very, you know, lovely words because that means they believe that Walt is real. That's number one. Like, and then the other one I get is that, you know, there was not enough of my favorite character, insert name here. You know, there was not enough Henry in the last book, or there wasn't enough Vic in the last book, or there wasn't enough Lucian in the last book. And I knew I'd reached a certain point in my writing career when I started getting emails that said, you know, there really wasn't enough Dog in the last book. So in this book, there is a lot of Dog. I just want to be clear about that. Like, and I got to give you the backstory on where Dog came from, like that, because I steal people. from my life, and implement them as characters in my books. But it's not, just our species, it's all the other species too. Like if you read about a horse in one of my books, it's a horse I've owned or I've known, dogs, cats, anything and everything like that. And so the dog actually came from a dog that I had whenever I was building the ranch. I built my ranch myself. And so, what happened is that, it's out in the middle of nowhere, and so you couldn't hire anybody to come out there and build because it just took too long to get there and get home at the end of the day. And I had one of those dads that thought you were slave labor anyway until you escaped. And so, anyway, I was building it myself. The problem was I would only go into town to get supplies every couple of weeks, right? Well, I started noticing that I was losing the ability of human speech is what was happening over a period of time. And what would happen was I would make the run into town, and I would get to the lumber yard, and I would walk in, and the kid that worked there would walk up to me and say, "Can I help you?" And I would look at him and go, "Yes." And I rapidly started figuring out I was going to have a reputation in no time flat, if I didn't do something, right? And so I thought, a dog. I'll get a dog is what I'll do. I've never had a dog, in my adult life. I had when I was a kid. I moved around all of my young adulthood. So I never had an animal. So I thought, I'll go get a dog. I can have somebody to talk to, because we all talk to our animals and think they understand every word we say, right? So I drive into Sheridan, and I get there, to the pound, and I go into the shelter there and get inside, and they've got this big communal area, with cyclone fence, all boxed off. And all the dogs are in there wrestling around and roiling and barking and, making a big fuss. And there's this one dog on one side all the way back. All the way back away from the viewing area. And, he's pretty good size, about 60 pounds. Excuse me. And he's got his head leaned against the cyclone fence like this, kind of sad looking. Doing this whole Sarah Bernhardt kind of look and I look at the kid that's standing beside me, from high school, and I said, "It must be hard to find a home for the older dogs like that." And he looks at me and he goes, yeah, he gets the shot tomorrow. And I think they just tell you that about every dog you ask about. And I said, "Well, load him up." So they bring him in, load him up, and they put him in the truck, and I drive him over to Mike Pilch's, veterinarian office, and I bring him in. Me and Mike lift him up on the counter, and Mike's looking at him and everything, and he says, "Well, what kind of dog is this, Craig?" And I said, "I've got my little piece of paper, from the official high schooler," and I said, he's part German Shepherd and he's part Lab." And Mike's peeling, his lips back, from a very kind of square-looking muzzle, and he turns and looks at me and goes, "Craig, this dog's got a lot of Saint Bernard in him." And I was like, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah, and I don't think this dog is 2 months old." And 147 pounds that dog weighed by the time he got through growing. And I had coyotes that would shoot across the property when I was building the house, little scoops of them. And there was one night when they come scooting through there, and after he'd been grown up a little bit, he walked to the edge of the platform looking at him, and those coyotes were like, "Shit, a bear!" Going the other way. But he was great, because it was really interesting, because he and I were there alone pretty much, for about 3 months, and then I got the windows and doors all put in, got the heat on. And that's when my wife Judy moved out from Philadelphia, and so women are strange that way. They like windows and doors and heat, And so anyway, she came out, and we're sitting there in the kitchen, and we're sitting at a card table, with some folding chairs, and the dog really, looked at her as this fifth wheel. He really did. He was like, "Why?" I would catch him looking at her, and he was giving her this look that was like, "Why are you here?" And so finally, Judy and I are talking, and she says, "Well, you know what? There's some kind of really strange, Jack London-esque, weird relationship between you and this dog, Craig." And I was like, "Well, now why do you say that?" And she goes, "Craig, you can look at a tool and he will go pick it up and bring it to you." And I'm like, "Well, that's just because we've been out here working, for 3 months. He just, he's used to me, doing it. It's just an, acquired ability or something like that." And she's like, "Craig, the dog nods when you talk to it." And I was like, "He does not." And I looked over at the dog. I said, "You don't do that, do you?" And he's like, So I had to come to terms with that to a certain extent. I got one more thing to tell you before I open it up, let you guys ask some questions if you want to. And that is, there's one shocking thing that happens in this book, but I want you to be prepared for it. I don't want you to be surprised by it and taken aback. Walt gets a cell phone. I didn't say how long it lasts, but he gets one, all right? Because he's out there in the desert, right? And so he really doesn't have much choice. He can't really carry a two-way police radio around with him, and so he has to go get a phone, and so he goes into this vape head shop in Rock Springs, and goes in, and they've got used phones, on the second, little counter, shelf. And he looks down and says, I'm looking for a phone. And the kid that works there is like, well, do you want 5G? Do you want pro lenses? Do you want to be able to video edit? Do you want it? Well, it's like, I would like for it to make and receive calls. He's like, okay, yeah, sure. And he reaches down, he pulls out this phone, sets it on the counter, and it's a flip phone, is what it is. It's like, how does it work? And the kid opens it up and he goes, this is a green button to make the calls. This is a red button to end the calls. And it's your numbers that you use to type in. He's like, oh, okay, all right. And Walt's looking at it and he's like, it's in remarkably good shape, for a refurbished phone. And, the kid looks at him and goes, well, that's because most of the people that buy this phone, they die. And Walt's like, not from using the phone. The kid's like, no, it's like old people. They buy them and then they die. And we get them. And so for the first time in 21 years, I get the copy edited version back of my book. And one of the big notes right there at the front page is, you cannot call it the jitterbug because they're going to sue the shit out of you. She said, you make fun of that thing all the way through the book. You got to change it. So it's called the jug bug. So now you know something that you didn't know. So there you go. Anybody got any questions? Anything you'd like to ask? Anything on your mind? Now's your chance. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just off the wall, probably. You ever been in Archer City, Texas?
Yeah, where Larry McMurtry.
Is that a worthwhile trip?
Oh gosh, yeah. It's kind of gone along the wayside though. A lot of the bookstores are not open there anymore. I don't even know if any of them are anymore. Michael, do you know in Archer City, with Larry McMurtry, are any of those bookstores still open, or are they all closed up and gone?
Not sure.
Yeah, I think they're all closed up and gone. Which was kind of cool because what Larry McMurtry did was take all the buildings in town and turn them all into bookstores. So it was all used bookstores out of the whole town. That's actually where they filmed the Last Picture Show, which is just a spectacular movie and an even better book. You want to hear a Larry McMurtry story? You guys want to hear one?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm down at the Tucson Festival of Books, and True West magazine had a reception for Larry McMurtry. And it was at this restaurant, this event center. So I go over there, Judy and I do, and we get there, and I'm the only guy with a cowboy hat on. And I was like, this is weird. It's Larry McMurtry, for goodness sake. There should be more people in here with cowboy hats on. And so, we're standing around there, and suddenly Larry McMurtry comes in with this entourage, great flourish, a lot of people around him and everything, and people are running up to him and everything. And Judy's like, well, you should go say hi and tell him you appreciate his work, or something. And I was like, I'm not going to be that guy. I'm not going to bother him. Everybody's trying to get a piece of him. I'm going to leave him alone. And so we stood over at the bar, and I drank a beer. And, I'm getting ready to leave, and I'm thinking we can just head out. And I look over, and Larry McMurtry is standing at the end of the buffet table all by himself. And I was like, and he's looking kind of confused. He's kind of glancing around a little bit. And by that time, he was pretty old. And I thought, did he just get left, over at the buffet table? And he just walked off and left him? And I thought, I'm going to go at least check on him, and say hi or something and see if he needs some help or anything. And so I walk over and I said, Mr. McMurtry, I just want to tell you, I think, The Last Picture Show is one of the greatest novels ever written. And he grabs my arm and pulls me in close to him like this. And he said, stay here for 5 or 10 minutes. And I was like, sure. And I'm looking around because I'm thinking there must be some problem or something, and I'm looking around. And I turn around and I look at him and he goes, I just don't want to talk about Lonesome Dove for 5 minutes. Anybody else? Well, you guys are quiet. Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious if you could tell the same stories at every place to stop. Because
No,
it must be
they're all
exhausting.
different. My wife actually, our granddaughter's here, and so she's not going to come out, but she travels with me and tours, with me. And I begged her, when I'm, at, events, I'm always like, go take a walk. Go, have a drink, go to a museum, go watch a movie, go do anything except, sit here and listen to me talk again, okay? And I always tell her like that, if the roles were reversed, and you were the author doing an event every night, I would not be here, okay? So, skedaddle and go out, and she goes, no, I like going with you. And she said, you change it every night. It's always different. You're always fine-tuning and changing things just to see, what kind of a response you'll get. And so she said, it's kind of fun, to be there every night. So, she's my wife. She might just be being nice. But yeah, and then for me, I don't think I could remember well enough to do the exact same event over and over. The nice thing is whenever we do the Q&A, that's very improvisational because I never know what anybody's going to ask about. And so I can just, see where it goes, and what's going to happen like that. And generally, the way I tend to do events, though, is tell stories like that because that's what I do. Whenever I'm thinking about, standing up here, decomposing like at the Great American Novel or telling stories to kind of illustrate a point. To me, it's always going to be more fun to just tell you the stories, like kind of behind the scenes kind of stuff. It's much more fun. So, anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
So when she said, be careful out in that desert, do you utilize what she shared?
I actually did. There was an alien abduction, supposedly, that happened to this one rancher. And he swore by it until the end of his days that he had, and gave a very, very detailed, account, of how he had been picked up by Higo One and the Clam people and had been taken to their planet and, all of this stuff like that. And this guy was like a real kind of straight arrow rancher, that you wouldn't think would ever in a million years, succumb to like some kind of wild story like that or something like that. He didn't drink or anything like that. And it just, I thought, boy, this is interesting, what this does. And places like that do have an effect on people in some ways. It's always fun to see what those are. But yeah, I used a lot of the stuff that's in the book. So. Yes, ma'am.
Is the Red Pony based on one place or a compilation of many bars?
It's the U-Turn Inn in U-Cross. We used to have this one bar in U-Cross, population 25, and it was the U-Turn Inn, which was EWE, turn in. And I remember the sign that they had a cowboy at a bar with two sheep, one on each side. So I didn't think I could get away with that, so I thought maybe a Red Pony might be a good bet. But yeah, and it was a great little bar, and it was there for 50 years or so. And then it got a little too rowdy for the U-Cross Foundation. They put a bulldozer through it one day. And so it was a shame too, because it was a real great place for cross-pollination of all the artists. I mean, you could walk in there and there would be a Scottish sculptor sitting next to a Powder River cowboy, and they'd be talking, about art, and so it was really a kind of a cool thing, I think for a lot of the artists that came in, for those residencies like that, because it was more of an opportunity to kind of touch base with the community and see what was going on out there, which was fun.
So when you say the artist came in for a residency, so what was that a long-standing situation?
Yeah, the U-Cross Foundation pretty much started off, I think, in the mid-1960s. And it's a big artist retreat, and they bring people in from all over the world. And they come in, they spend either anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks, there, and they provide them, with living expenses, they take care of them, give them a small studio to work in, and all this kind of stuff. So it's a very prestigious, artist retreat. They've never invited me. So, that's not true. They're wonderful. They're good neighbors. So. Yes, ma'am.
I just wonder if you would talk a little bit about your discipline as a writer.
What would believe you, honey? We've spent the better part of an hour together here. What would lead you to believe that I have any discipline at all? You've heard the things coming out of my mouth, for
because
goodness
you've written
sake.
21 books.
Yeah, that's true. That's
I
true.
have to think that maybe there's some kind of discipline.
Yeah, well, you know what? It's the old saying that if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And I really, really love what I do. I'm always laughing like that because, I'll do workshops and there'll be students and they'll say, well, what's it like, to go out and have a beer with Lou Diamond Phillips, or, go to all these countries, where your books have been translated and all this kind of stuff. And I'm always looking at them and going, you do realize that that's only 5% of what I do, right? That the other 95% of my life is spent locked in a room, typing about my imaginary friends, okay? And so if you're looking to be the paparazzi, or something like that, you maybe ought to choose something other than being an author like that, because there's a lot of introverted, hermitive, kind of qualities, to that lifestyle like that. And I have to admit that, I really, really enjoy that. I'm the kid that would look out the windows and get an eraser thrown at him by the teacher and be told, well, you're not going to amount to much staring out windows and figuring out fairy tale stories, now are you? Kind of worked out pretty well, actually. But yeah, that's the thing. Okay, and I'm kind of a blue collar, working class guy. And so I get up in the morning, get everything squared away on the ranch, have breakfast with Judy, and then head up in the loft. It's early still, and I'll run all the way through till about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then come down and talk with Judy about what I'm writing, which is really nice to have somebody you care about and are close to, be involved with the work. Now, she also, her parents were the editors for the Hartford Courant in Hartford, Connecticut, and so she has a strong editorial background, a newspaper background, her education is much greater than mine. And so it's kind of handy, to have her involved in that process. The other thing is this is my personal take on this, so you can ignore this part completely if you want to. I'm a firm believer that it's really hard to be in a relationship or be married to an artist, because they're always going to have part of their brain going in a different direction. You're never going to have all of them. They're always going to be thinking about what it is they're writing, how they're going to write the characters and all this kind of stuff. And it's almost like being in a relationship with someone who's having an affair, because their energy's going somewhere else, to a certain extent. And so if you can get, your significant other involved, I always tell people, if you can get them involved in your work, it's a fantastic thing. And immediately, first thing they always say is, so I should get my husband or my wife involved in my writing. And I'm like, that can go one of two ways. You will either have one of the best working relationships you've ever had in your entire life, or you will be divorced in about 6 weeks, like it is the other thing too. But yeah, it's kind of a, for me, it's like breathing. I wouldn't know what to do if I didn't have the writing to do. I'd be in deep trouble.
I think one of the things that I love about Walt the most is his principles.
No, thank you.
He is gutsy and, is willing to go someplace that maybe...
He might not get out of it.
Right.
There's a part actually in this book where Dick, looks at him and says, this is how you're going to die, this stupid shit.
Yeah.
It's not going to be some big earth-shaking case. You're just going to be in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people, and somebody's going to shoot you.
Yeah.
And there are some moments as the book goes on where you're like, those words might ring true before this is all over with. But he has a compass. He's got a moral compass of right and wrong.
Right. And that really attracted me. And is he based on somebody?
He's actually based on a bunch of different guys I worked with.
Okay.
And he has that, it was more of a Dr. Frankenstein, Walt was. Taking bits and pieces, from a lot of different, law enforcement guys I knew, and putting them together to make, the guy that I wanted. And the way I describe Walt is, if my truck slides off the road on I-25 in January, that set of headlights that pulls up behind me, that's the guy I want in the truck.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, it's interesting like that, because even in we get all kinds of clear indications about who Walt really is, but one of them came across in First Frost, the book from last year. Whenever, at the beginning of the book, Walt and Henry graduated from college, they're going to lose their deferment, so they join up. So they're going to end up going to Vietnam one way or the other. And so, so they've got this big epic road trip that they've got to make across the country on Route 66 in 1964. But one of their last days in California, Southern California, where they both went to school, they're surfing. They're having one last day of surfing is what they're doing. And what happens is there's a ship that comes around the corner at Point Doom and hits the rocks because a storm is coming in, pushes into the rocks, and it starts to go down. And there are guys jumping off the boat trying to swim to shore, and they're getting drowned. And so both Walt and Henry take their surfboards and dive into the water and go out, and they make like 2 or 3 trips bringing these guys back in, getting them in. Some make it, some don't, but they get them back in. On the last trip, when Walt, finally gets, to shore, the sheriff of Los Angeles County is waiting for him there. And, he looks at Walt like that and he says, "Did you guys come off that boat?" And Walt says, "No, sir." Again, he says, "Did you know any of these people that you saved and any of the people on that boat?" And Walt says, "Well, no, sir." And he said, "Why would you risk your life to go out there and try and save those people?" And Walt looks at him and he goes, "Because it was the right thing to do."
Yeah.
Even then, that code is there.
Yeah.
The way I respond to it is I always say that, like, there is no sliding scale of justice in Absaroka County.
Yeah.
Walt's, it's an even playing field. Everybody gets the fair shake. But if you do make a mistake, he's also the last guy you want after you, because he ain't ever going to stop.
Yeah.
So, anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
So when you are chasing down a story or a story's chasing down you, how much initially is sequential and how much of the story gets woven in further down the road?
Oh, that's a really good question. That is a really good question. I do big outlines. I do really big, huge outlines because I tend to write what I refer to as socially responsible crime fiction, in the sense that I'm not just looking, to stack up bodies to get you to flip pages, late at night. I mean, generally I've got something to say. There's some kind of social issue that I want to deal with or contend with. And so, one of the biggest statements that you make in a piece of crime fiction, in a whodunit, is who did it, right? So you kind of need to know who did it. And more importantly, you need to know why they did it. And so I start out with these really elaborate outlines, like I can get going on these things like that. But writing a book is also more like it's a journey. It's not a destination.
Yeah.
Like that. And so you think you know what the book is about, but you have to write the book, at least the first draft of it, before you really know what it's about. And then by the time you get to the end, you know what it's about. You know, what stuff can come out of that book, what stuff needs to go into that book, like to interweave all of those ideas, to emphasize certain structures, or certain ideas. And that goes on all the way through until there's a deadline and they take it away from you and won't let you have it again. But thank God they do, because if they didn't, I'd still be rewriting The Cold Dish. We wouldn't be here. You guys would have said, yeah, he was kind of a one-hit wonder, wasn't he? Yes, ma'am.
How long does it take you to write a book?
I finished next year's book before I went on tour this year. It's the first time that's ever happened. Finished one in 5 months. And just, blasted right through it. And it was fun to write, I have to admit. It was really fun to write. But yeah, generally, at least 6 months. It usually takes at least 6 months to do, a draft. And then there are other books, of course, that take, more research. There was one that I wrote about The Little Big One, The Next to Last Stand. When I wrote that one, I knew I had to be a past master on everything about the Little Big Horn, about Custer, about, everything about that battle, so that I'd have something new to say about it, and it wouldn't be the same boring stuff that you've read in all these other books. There was another one that I did called Hell is Empty, which was a retelling of Dante's Inferno. And I knew I had to know everything there was to know about Dante's Inferno, which was a blast, because I remember when the book came out, I would say, okay, how many people have, read Dante's Inferno? Some people, would raise their hands, about maybe a third of the audience. And I would say, how many people have finished Dante's Inferno? Hands would go back down. But I had to know, I had to know everything there was to know about that to kind of mimic, what was happening with Walt, in the Bighorn National Forest and the Cloud Peak Wilderness areas. It was kind of like the tour that Dante takes through hell. And those take a little more time, because you got to make sure you get it right. We're in a period in time where you have no excuse. You can always look stuff up and find it. There's no, if you're just being lazy, then you get what you deserve. So. Anybody else? Yes?
When did you decide in your life that you wanted to be a storyteller?
You know what? I didn't, because what happened was I come from a family of storytellers, and they were all really good at it, and I was the worst. I was the worst storyteller in my family. And one of the things I took into consideration was I thought, okay, if I can't tell them, maybe I can write them down. Maybe that's how I'll express what it is that I have to say. And that kind of launched, my writing career undercover. Because, wanting to be a writer is kind of like wanting to be an astronaut. The odds against you are so great, don't tell anybody so you don't embarrass yourself. for goodness sake. So I didn't tell anybody I wanted to be a writer. I just wrote, And then when I finally stumbled onto the plot and the character of Walt Longmire, I wrote The Cold Dish, and he got picked up by Viking Penguin and came out and everything like that. And everybody I know, including family, they were all like, "You wrote a book?" And they were just a little too incredulous for my taste. All right, I got to tell you like that. But yeah, I was like, "Yeah, I wrote a book." Okay. And so once again, I was a 30-year overnight success. Okay. That's how it all kind of fell into place for me. So, anybody else? Yeah.
What is your background? Where were you born and went to school?
Oh gosh, anywhere and everywhere. One of the things I like to do is I like to travel, especially in my youth, and my young adulthood, because a lot of the writers that I really like didn't start out as writers. They didn't go to writing school to become writers. They just had life experience. They went out and had as many adventures and experiences as they could. So that when they finally did sit down, to write something, they had a lot of stories to bring to bear to do that. And so for me, it was like a really big deal, to not get anchored in one place, and to move around a lot of different places, doing a lot of different things and a lot of different economic levels and all that, just as experience for the writing. Now, what could have happened is I never would have got a book published, and then I would have just wasted my whole life. But I was lucky, it all kind of fell into place. So, anybody else? I've talked you out.
I am curious if the last time you were here, you were preparing to go and pick up the award, which is going to be a big sculpture. Did you go? Have you been?
No, that's in about a week, I think it is. And I finish up in Amarillo. They've warned me that it's very large and very heavy. It's a statue of a buffalo. And I don't know what I'm going to do. I guess I'll put it in a bag and carry it, with me on the plane, I guess. If I can carry it, I guess. But they did warn me. They said it weighs a ton. Yeah, really. I got to take a hand truck with me when I get on the plane. What I'll probably end up doing. But it's very nice, because the Owen Wister Award. Owen Wister really is kind of like the father of the contemporary Western. He's really kind of responsible, for elevating it past, the dime store, comic books and that kind of stuff. The complexities of the characters, the complexity of plot, and actually using historical issues to develop, the storylines and everything. So it's kind of fun, to capture that. And the other thing is the Virginian actually gets his man in the saloon of the Occidental Hotel in Buffalo, Wyoming, which is 17 and a half miles from my ranch. And so it's kind of, in a way, I'm kind of bringing Owen home. So, anyway, thank you guys so much. Wonderful seeing you again. Windows in. I'm ready. If our book needs to get signed, come on up.